Dishonored is an old favorite of mine. I have a soft spot for Arcane games, and Dishonored was the first Arcane title I played. The game is at its core an action and/or stealth game with immersive sim aspects. The first safe in the game has the code 451. Before we get to the meat of the discussion, let me just say, wow, this game looks good. It has held up beautifully for a 2012 game. I know saying that strong art direction is key for a game to continue looking good a decade after it was made is hardly a hot take. Just add this to the list of proof for that thesis. The game isn't too long. How Long to Beat rates it at 16 hours for the main game and another 9.5 hours for its two major DLCs, The Knife of Dunwall and the Brigmore Witches combined. I've played the game a total of 4 times. The latest run I did in preparation for this video on the hardest difficulty for both the main game and the 2 DLCs. We'll talk more about difficulty later when we get onto gameplay. I tend to play Dishonored stealthily. I enjoy stealth games and I tried to play non-lethally as I usually do. Emphasis on tried. I didn't manage a clean hands run for the main game. When it was time for the DLCs, I decided I wouldn't be too fussed about not killing targets. The focus on non-lethal gameplay resulted in a low chaos run, and I want to start the gameplay discussion on the chaos system. Dishonored's chaos system is a fun twist on the usual morality systems in games. When Shepard goes renegade, it changes specific situations and dialogue, and when Cole from Infamous goes evil, it changes him, the character. But in Dishonored, when our 2 player characters, Corva and Dowd, kill indiscriminately, it doesn't change them, it changes Dunwall instead. The game only distinguishes between high and low chaos, with high chaos resulting in more rats, weepers, and guards, and while the final level is the same across both chaos states, it changes quite a bit depending on if your chaos is high or low. Obviously, lower chaos is required for the best ending, and high chaos for the worst ending. Corva and Dowd have pretty varied arsenals of weapons and magical powers, which are fun, and while the differences between the 2 player characters are fairly small, some of Dowd's powers are fun twists on Corva's power. For example, Dowd's version of Blink stops time when aiming it, which enables things like this. Nothing personal, kid. The game's powers really come into their own in high chaos playthroughs, as many of them can be very destructive. One of the odd oversights with the game's combat is that aerial takedowns are strictly lethal, a problem which Dishonored 2 rectifies, and the base game does have a more limited non-lethal arsenal than its lethal. For example, the base game doesn't let Corvo upgrade the number of non-lethal crossbow bolts he can carry, but in the DLCs Dowd can upgrade his non-lethal bolt carry capacity, and Dowd also has access to non-lethal grenades and mines. Still, mostly minor points given that non-lethal and combat gameplay kind of clashes. The game's combat is really where the immersive sim qualities shine in my view. For example, the game will freely let you attach a mine to a throwable bottle meant to be used to distract guards to create an improvised hand grenade. The only real problems I can find with the game's powers is that Blink is, in my view, a bit too powerful. All players, irrespective of playstyles, will use Blink and will get Blink too. In game theory terms, it's a dominant strategy. Speaking of dominant strategies, let's move on to level design. I really like the level design in Dishonored. Levels are beautiful and always fun to play. The only complaint I thought I'd have going into this review was that the guards are vertically challenged, by which I mean that they don't see you if you're more than 2 meters up in the air. I'm glad to report that this is largely a non-issue on the highest difficulty. I found out the hard way, repeatedly. The levels are, as mentioned, beautiful, with a unique aesthetic and offer different challenges, all of which can be overcome in several different ways, ranging from using Blink to climb over one of its walls of light to bypassing a security checkpoint by completing a side quest. There's even an invitation to Lady Boyle's party, which can be found on the Golden Cat level. One of my favorite aspects of the mission design in Dishonored is how the non-lethal options sometimes completely changes the mission objectives. In the first assassination assassination mission, the non-lethal option makes you knock out the target and take him to a specific room to be branded, and in many ways it plays out just like the assassination would have if you took care to hide the body. But in the second assassination mission, the Golden Cat, you're supposed to take out the Pendleton twins, and the non-lethal options give you another target. In fact, you never even need to find the Pendleton brothers to complete the missions if you head straight for your other target, the art dealer. And there's a similar thing with the Lord Regent Burroughs. You don't need to even see him to complete the mission the non-lethal way. The game also features optional side missions, one of which is required to complete to get the non-lethal option on a target. There really isn't a lot to say about the side missions, except that the best ones, in my opinion, are the ones like delivering the note to Lord Shaw, rescuing Callista's uncle, and saving the scientists. Basically, the ones you get from the Hound Pit's pub crew. Speaking of the Hound Pit's crew, let's move on to the story. I really like the main game story, which on first thought is kind of strange. I mean, the plot is weak, the main villain's plan is dumb, and I don't really care about most of the characters. But what Dishonored lacks in plot, it more than makes up for in atmosphere. Alright, beware spoilers. The plot synopsis is as follows. Corvo Atano is the Empress Jessamine's bodyguard, who gets home from a trip from across the Empire to find a cure for the rat plague just in time to take the fall for his Empress getting killed, and her daughter and next in line for the throne, Emily, getting kidnapped. After a couple of months in prison, a group called the Loyalists conspire to get Corvo to escape from prison, after which the enigmatic god, the Outsider, decides to give Corvo magic powers, which Corvo used to dispatch the Loyalists' enemies and rescue young Emily. First up is the current High Overseer, a religious leader. While in the area, Corvo rescues Teague Martin, one of the Loyalists active in the Overseer Order. After the High Overseer, Corvo's next target is the Pendleton brothers, who are hanging out at a local bathhouse, the Golden Cat, where they are holding Emily. After dealing with the brothers and rescuing Emily, Corvo goes to kidnap famous scientist and painter Anton Sokolov, who knows who the Lord Regent's girlfriend and financial supporter from the aristocracy is. After speaking with Sokolov, the Loyalists find out that the Lord Regent's backer is none other than Lady Boyle, famous aristocrat. Lady Boyle is conveniently throwing a party when Corvo comes for her, and after that operation, he returns to Dunwall Tower, where the Empress was killed to deal with the Lord Regent Hiram Burroughs himself. Corvo's reward for all his hard work is an arsenic and tonic, and he gets dumped in the river. Curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal, Havelock. Where the assassin Dowd, who actually killed the Empress, finds Corvo and throws him in a hole. Corvo quickly gets out, dispatches Dowd, returns to the Hound Pit's pub where the Loyalists used to hang out, and gets a ride to the Loyalists' new digs at King Sparrow Island, where the Loyalists are dealt with, hopefully Emily is saved, and the credits roll. As I mentioned before, the plot is hardly revolutionary, but Corvo is given a real clear goal and has an understandable motivation in the form of revenge and saving Emily, who the game heavily implies is Corvo's daughter. Dishonored's plot doesn't need to be very strong, as its setting is so interesting. Going after the different targets is mainly an excuse to explore this dark, steampunk, playcore versions of mid-1800s London. Meeting the villains and creeps who live there is fun, and the game almost seems to want you to play the bad guy. There are only a handful of genuinely good people in the setting, like Callista and Samuel the Boatman, and depending on your playstyle, even innocent Emily can become a vengeful tyrant by the end of the game. The more you look into and learn about the different characters, the more you realize just how badly the people of Dunwall are shafted. My favorite examples are the High Overseer, who we can find out likes to break his Order's 7 religious strictures every day as a dark joke. The Spy Master turned Lord Regent, who purposefully imported the plague to Dunwall to kill off the poor people, who he considers to be freeloaders, which, I mean, he straight up admits all of this in an audio log. And of course, the youngest Lord Pendleton, who sends Corvo to kill his 2 elder brothers so that the Loyalists can get more votes in Parliament. And just coincidentally, that makes young Trevor Pendleton the heir to the family estate. And Trevor also sends Corvo to fight a duel against another lord that he insulted without telling Corvo that the favor he is asking for is to fight a duel to the death. There are many more, of course, like the two scientists. In short, Dunwall is a dark place full of bad people, and the game gives Corvo and the player the option to deal with the Loyalists' enemies in a non-lethal way, which in many cases ends up being fate's worse than death. For example, the aforementioned High Overseers can be dealt with non-lethally by chemically burning his face, which is a punishment to former Abbey of the Everyman members who have been excommunicated. The Abbey then responds to their highest leader being excommunicated or, branded by an unknown assailant by throwing him out without questioning what happened, and he catches the plague and wanders the street of Dunwall homeless in the next mission. So much for compassion. The compassionate treatment for the Pendleton brothers is having them kidnapped, having their heads shaved, tongues cut out, and being sent to work in their old silver mines. And Lady Boyle has probably the most horrifying fate if dealt with non-lethally, being handed over to her stalker to live the rest of her life with him. It's a real shame that the game doesn't keep this up, in my opinion. Dowd's fate worse than death is living with his guilt, I guess. The Lord Regent is exposed as a traitor and the one who started the plague, and gets jailed, presumably to be executed. The level does feature a professional who specializes in enhanced interrogation methods, let's say. So maybe the implication is that he'll suffer before prison. The loyalists who backstab you are all killed by Havelock using poison in the low chaos ending, and die due to infighting in high chaos. Havelock himself, not really sure, not much. The game doesn't really say what happens. I really think the fates worse than death really add to Dunwall's oppressive atmosphere, and I wish there were more of them. Speaking of oppressive atmosphere, my favorite character in Dishonored is the Outsider. He's such a fascinating character and a perfect addition to the grim setting of Dunwall. The Outsider is some sort of ancient god who sees the chaos in Dunwall and decides to do absolutely nothing about it. At first glance, he might appear to be an ally to Corvo. I mean, in D&D terms, Corvo seems like the archetypal warlock with the Outsider as his patron. But if you pay attention, you notice that the Outsider doesn't give Corvo magic so that he can escape and make things right. The Outsider gives Corvo his magic after he escapes Coleridge prison. The Outsider doesn't care if Corvo or anyone else lives or dies. He just gives powers to interesting people just to see what they'll do. He pretty much admits as much when you visit his shrines. A bored god who gives interesting magic just to see what happens is perfect for Dunwall, and the Outsider's indifference adds to Dishonored's theme of moral grayness. Speaking of morally grey characters, let's discuss Dishonored's two DLCs, The Knife of Dunwall and The Brigmore Witches. The DLCs form one story about the assassin Dowd, which is set during the events of Dishonored. The gameplay is still fantastic, and as mentioned in the gameplay section, it gives players more non-lethal options, which is great. The difficulty is also increased pretty dramatically in the case of the highest difficulty, which is also great. This is DLC meant to be played after the main game is complete, so it makes perfect sense for it to be more challenging. The level design is still very strong across both DLCs, and on paper, the story is very promising. Unfortunately, the DLCs are noticeably weaker in story and, crucially, in atmosphere. Also, in my opinion, The Knife of Dunwall is stronger than Brigmore Witches for several reasons, which we'll get to. First of all, let's get a plot synopsis. Again, spoiler warnings. As we learn in the main game, Dowd is a legendary assassin in charge of a syndicate of assassins who, for the first time ever, feels intense guilt after a job. After killing Empress Jessamine, Dowd wallows in guilt, and the Outsider visits him to give a cryptic hint about Delilah. Dowd has heard of a ship named Delilah, so he takes his apprentice Billy Lurk to a whale slaughterhouse to confront the ship's owner, Rotswald, who says the ship was named by its previous owner, barrister Timsh after a woman Timsh fancies. Our dynamic duo give Timsh a house call and finds out through Timsh's niece that Delilah Copperspoon was a baker at Dunwall Tower who became a great painter and seduced and used Timsh. Delilah and her posse live at Brigmore Manor, but before Billy and Dowd can go check it out, they need to rescue some of Dowd's assassins as the Overseers have attacked Dowd's base. Plot twist, Delilah orchestrated the attack with Billy Lurk and the Overseers, and would have gotten away with it too if the Overseer commander, Hume, hadn't attacked too early. This is where the Knife of Dunwall ends, and we start Brigmore Witches with a dream sequence where Dowd fights Corvo in Dowd's base. To get to Brigmore, Dowd needs a ship, so he has to break out a ship captain he knows, Lizzie Stride, from prison. While Lizzie was in the pen, her second-in-command took over her gang and her ship, so the next mission is to get rid of him. But it turns out the rival Hatter gang has stolen an engine component from Lizzie's boat, which Dowd will have to get by bargaining with either the leader, Mr. Hat, or his nurse, Nurse Trimble, either by resolving the nurse versus Mr. Hat power struggle in favor of Mr. Hat by killing the nurse, or by going down into the sewers and turn the water back on so that the Hatters have power again. In the sewers, there are some of Delilah's witches because... wait, why are they here? Either way, after getting the engine part, Lizzie takes Dowd on her ship out to Brigmore Manor. Dowd infiltrates Brigmore Manor and discovers that Delilah's evil plan is to use a ritual to possess Emily's body and take over the Empire. But fortunately, Dowd is able to travel into the void and stop her by killing her or trapping her in a painting. I have several issues with this plot. Firstly, it bothers me how the DLCs treat the Outsider, one of the series' most important and interesting characters. Why was the Outsider's characterization as a bored observer who never directly meddles thrown out to kick off the plot? Surely it would have worked better had the plot gotten started another way, where Dowd takes the initiative to investigate Delilah. Also, the Outsider specifically says that there are only 8 people in the world with his mark, and that he doesn't pick favorites. But the plot starts off by him setting Dowd on a path to stop Delilah. How is that not taking a side? Secondly, why was the Billy Lurk betrayal plot twist needed? The player knows next to nothing about Dowd and Billy, and is almost guaranteed not to be invested enough for the betrayal to feel as momentous as the writers seem to have wanted. Despite me joking about it earlier, the Loyalist betraying Corvo genuinely took me by surprise the first time I played the game, as I hadn't paid enough attention to see what was coming. The Loyalist's betrayal makes sense for their goals, makes sense for the setting, and makes sense emotionally, by which I mean the player and Corvo know the characters enough for the betrayal to sting. The same can't be said for Lurk's betrayal. I know next to nothing about Lurk, nor about Dowd and Lurk's relationship. I really don't care. It still makes sense in terms of setting. Dunwall is definitely the sort of place where people turn on each other, but the twist doesn't feel satisfying and has no real impact on the story going forward. So the last level of Knife of Dunwall, which is a reused level from the main game by the way, just ends up being the worst in terms of both gameplay and story. Compounding this misstep is the first level of Brigmore Witches, which is another reused level from the main game, Coldridge Prison. While the story in the Knife of Dunwall wasn't super strong, I feel that it gets weaker still in the Brigmore Witches. It feels meandery to have to rescue a new character and help this new character I don't really care about with their internal gang conflict. The Hatter gang detour feels a bit like padding, but I can overlook that, given that the gang itself and its 2 major characters and Mr. Hat and Nurse Trimble are interesting. Regarding the sewer witches, I must have just missed why they're there on my playthrough, and in a way it really feels like the writers just realized we'd barely see the villain and her coven, so they might as well be thrown down there. After consulting a fan wiki of the game, I found out that the witches can be overheard talking about being in the sewers to assassinate Dowd, which is kind of confusing. I mean, why did they think Dowd would go down to the sewers underneath the Hatter gang's hideout? Anyways, the final mission of the Brigmore Witches is appropriately the Brigmore Manor. The outdoors portion of the manor feels a bit bright to me. Maybe this is a nitpick, but when a game has such strong atmosphere, it's a bit disappointing that the DLC, which focuses on the occult side of the setting, is such a step down in terms of creepy atmosphere than the main game. I've been pretty harsh, but overall the DLCs are fun. and I recommend them for the gameplay if not for the story. The Knife of Dunwall is in my opinion overall stronger than the Brigmore Witches, but that might just be my personal preference for when the game focuses on the mundane aspects of the setting rather than the supernatural aspects of the setting. Though I'm sure the series never makes the mistake of focusing too much on the supernatural again. Join me next time for a 100% guaranteed true story about rootin' tootin' cowboy shootin' without a single lie. Guaranteed, no lies, all true.